Welcome to our breakout room where we're going to be talking about on-campus poll sites and some other fun things we've been up to here at Pace University. You can all see my screen, right? Okay, cool. I'm on a new Zoom update and everything looks different than it did like yesterday. So our presentation is called Leveraging New York State Law and Student Creativity to Host an On-Campus Poll Site. I am Erin. I am our campus champion at Pace University. I've been our campus champion. This will be my 6th school year in the role. And so I've worked with a lot of great AGF ambassadors and also our Pace Votes leaders who we have here through various organizational support and we've done a lot of great initiatives over the years, and most recently a lot of our focus has been on this on-campus poll site organizing. And I'm going to pass it over to Anne to introduce herself and then to kind of start us off.
Hello, my name is Anne. I am a rising junior here at Pace. I am a Pace Votes leader, and my pronouns are she and her. Could hear her. Here is what we will be discussing today. We will give you an introduction about Pace Votes leader, about our work, and also about the New York State law about on-campus poll sites and our process to get a campus poll site on the New York City Pace University campus. We will also touch upon the campus poll site that we did during the spring about the arts in our voter outreach, as well as getting a campus poll site for the November elections. Firstly, we are from the Pace New York City campus, like I mentioned. Our main focus is to engage or support students into civic engagement, especially for those across the country and abroad. We have both residential and commuter students, and we help students register and to help them vote wherever they choose to vote. Before spring 2024, our campus was split between 2 to 3 polling places. For context, in 2022, 74% were eligible to register to vote, while 25.5% were voted. In 2020, 81.5% of eligible students voted, while registered to vote, and 66.2% voted. Here's what we do here at CCAR and in Pace Votes. We do voter outreach at Pace, and we work with a lot of campus partners, including departments and student organization. We also work with the Andrew Goodman Foundation, Students Learn, Students Vote Coalition, and All In, which helped us support with our on-campus poll site process. We also have a good foundation of student leaders here at Pace Votes in different majors that help advance the projects that we have in stored. In terms of our goals, we want to prioritize outreach to Pace students that are voting at lower rates, especially those that don't usually have any interest in voting. We also want to maintain and expand long-term efforts to make voting a part of campus life for students, as well as working within our limited capacity and funding. As for our strategies, we include presenting in classes in UNV 101, which all freshmen have to take. We partnered with Residential Life. We table regularly. We do outreach through social medias, flyers, emails, and etc. We experiment with asynchronous election day, as well as we focus on campus poll site.
Cool. Thank you, Anne. And Anne's going to help me kind of engage with you all. So please put questions in the chat as we go through. And we'll also kind of pause and chat as various points too. So like Anne said, we've been doing voter education work for a while, and we kind of turned our attention to working towards an on-campus poll site just within the past few years. And we came to it kind of because of two main reasons. And so first, like Anne said, our campus for as long as I've been here and way longer has been split between multiple different pulse sites. And so we're a city school. All of our campus buildings are like within a few block radius here in downtown Manhattan. We have 4 residence halls, and they have consistently always been split between 2 to 3 pulse sites. That's really confusing when you're like a first-time voter and you're trying to go vote with your friend, but they live right down the street and they have to go to a vastly like different place than you. It has also been challenging because us and our partners at Residential Life have always done poll walks, so walking students to the polls, but that requires a lot more people because we're going to 3 different places than it would if it was just one spot. And so it was becoming really annoying. It first was 2 and then it became 3. And so we began to realize that this was just not going to be sustainable. At the same time, we had been working with AGF and our Student Government Association and our faculty council, who like approves the university calendar, to think through having an asynchronous class day on election day. And so kind of when COVID hit, the idea of having it be a class day but not have live in-person class or even live Zoom class was like becoming an option. And so we were able to get this done after a lot of student advocacy, but we realized that the impact wasn't as equitable as we hoped. So we had our first asynchronous class day on an election day in 2023. And we found that although a lot of students didn't have classes, that some did, and it was mostly our students in science labs and our performing arts students, both of which are majors that are not voting at the highest rates at PACE historically, and particularly science students, as mentioned, vote at the lowest rates at PACE. And so we realized that this wasn't a winning strategy if it wasn't benefiting the students we were really trying to support with voting. And so fortuitously, at that same time in 2022, New York State passed and signed into law a bill about student voter access. And so this came through. I know AGF and a bunch of AGF campuses were involved in getting this done. We had zero role in that, and so other people can speak to that. We are just the new beneficiaries of this law. And so the law is about campuses where there's over 300 students registered to vote with their on-campus address, which we certainly have here. And it's also about contiguous campuses, so like a traditional campus all like touching. We are not one of those. However, we have still found this law helpful. A lot of our space is all together. But then there are some residence halls that are like not attached, but we have still been able to use the language of the law successfully, both like within PACE and with the Board of Elections. And so I'm not a lawyer, but lawyers have explained to me what the law means, and its impact is kind of like twofold for student voters. So one, it empowers colleges and universities to request a singular on-campus poll site or a singular off-campus poll site of their choosing. And so it's mandating that the Board of Elections act in accordance with university demands, but it doesn't automatically happen. The universities have to request that it takes place. And I know a lot of campuses have struggled both like internally to get their university on board and externally to get the Board of Elections to act according to this law. And then the second part is what is kind of most significantly impactful for our campus is so it prohibits campus gerrymandering. And so campuses aren't allowed to be split up into multiple poll sites like we have been. There's a lot of great like articles, including from AGF about the law. So there's definitely resources about it if you're interested in learning more about what it actually means and also what the implementation has been like across campuses. I think we're unique in that we are one of the few poll sites that has come out after this law. I know a lot of colleges are still struggling to get poll sites in accordance with this law. And so we're going to talk through next kind of like how we navigated acting according to the law. Does anyone have any like questions or things to add about this law before we jump into stuff that's not as legal focused and so perhaps more exciting? So, by fall 2022, our ambassadors and our AGF program manager, Kaylee, and I had come to the conclusion that advocating for an on-campus poll site was something we wanted to do. It made sense for our campus, and also it was something we felt like could be accomplished by the few of us that there are. There's not a million people in our office. And so we started meeting with our like government liaison employees at PACE from our public affairs department, and speaking to them about why we believed this to be crucial for PACE student voters, why we believe this to be crucial for PACE as a participant in our downtown Manhattan community. And we didn't gain a lot of traction. The most difficult part of this process was not getting Board of Elections interest in having on-campus poll site. It was getting like the necessary PACE people on board. And so we explained the impact of going to multiple poll sites. We had some students write up testimony, and we still weren't really making any headway. And so in early 2023, AGF had Yael, who is legal counsel and does a lot of student voting law stuff, write like a formal memo that I gave to our government liaison people, our dean, the president of PACE, and our dean for students, who was supportive. And so this gave us kind of the organizational backing and the legitimacy that I think was what was kind of preventing us before. It showed that I knew what I was talking about. I was explaining the law correctly. And then it also showed that external organizations who PACE has a really long-term relationship with were watching and looking to see what PACE was doing, and that if PACE acted to get an on-campus poll site, that would make PACE look good, right? And so it's in PACE's favor because then it could be, you know, leading campus in doing this work. And so as this letter circulated internally, I was finally able to convince our government liaison people to reach out to the Board of Elections for us. And so they were able to establish that connection for me. And from there, it was actually a bit easier. We then just went with it. And this stage of the process is a lot of me like emailing and saying, let's move forward with things. It's not like us doing massive advocacy actions or anything. It's just like a lot of persistence and me aggravating a lot of people over email. And so after a while, we got in touch with the right people at the Board of Elections. They said they were interested and that they needed more poll sites in the area, which I know is often not the case for people. Sometimes the Board of Elections is the barrier. For us, it was not the Board of Elections. And so by early summer last year, the Board of Elections has said they would like to have an on-campus poll site here. And so the stage, which I understand to be similar in other cities and other states as well, is you propose the on-campus poll site and you have to give the Board of Elections kind of like the schematics of the room so they know what it looks like, that it meets their like bare minimum space and accessibility requirements. So we proposed our student center, which is like the room on campus where all the student events happen. And so they said yes, that it seemed like on paper the student center met the guidelines, and then they came in person. And so last fall we hosted a lot of site visits by the Board of Elections. Some of them were a few hours long. They were literally like with rulers measuring every inch of the student center room, measuring the accessibility ramp into the building, pacing out like the walk from the poll site room to the bathroom. measuring like our security checkpoint and would that be accessible for folks, testing the Wi-Fi, stuff like that. So it was a lot of like bringing them to campus and letting them explore the space. That took a few months for them to then, by December of 2023, they just emailed us and said, yes, we would like to be an on-campus pulse site. This is where it very much felt like a trial and error for me. And this was the like most opaque part of the process for me, because I had a few colleagues who had pulse sites on campus, but not in New York City. And it seemed like the process was different. And the only confirmation we had was this email from the Board of Elections saying we would like to start using this for the April New York presidential primary. So this is when we got like a little bit experimental with things. What we did and what ended up happening was we prepared like the space from Pace's end. So we reserved the space, made sure it was going to be free for election day, the day before, and the day after. We worked with facilities to make like an update to the accessibility ramp for the building to meet Board of Elections codes. And we met with security because you have to like sign in guests on campus and make plans when there's going to be lots of guests on campus. So we met with them a few times. Some of these partners had been involved in the process. Some hadn't been yet and weren't like, security's never thrilled to hear that there's going to be like dozens of people coming onto campus who aren't normally here. And so it was a little bit of like managing expectations and assuring folks that we knew what we were doing. We did a lot of outreach, and so we immediately incorporated information about the poll site into our voter education program. We already had planned that semester, tabling, educational events, class presentations, and we started kind of framing voter registration as if you register to vote on campus, you'll be voting like right in that room right there kind of thing. And so we started communicating it to students, had faculty share with their students, stuff like that. And then we learned more about the Board of Elections process. As it turns out, you have to request when you want the stuff from the Board of Elections to be delivered, which we didn't know. So they decided to show up 2 weeks in advance. And so there was not any space on campus for us to put voting machines. And so they were in my office for like a week and a half. And so that's something we learned is that you can request they only drop it off the day before if you reasonably don't have lots of space for the materials. And so it's a lot more of like small nitty-gritty practical things that came up rather than like massive organizing questions. So the Board of Elections delivers all the poll site booths, all the tables and chairs they use, the signage, the voter tabulation machines, all of that. We stored them on campus, we moved them into the room. And then we had election day, and we'll talk about how that went in a second. And then there's a breakdown process too. We've done this twice now. We hosted an on-campus poll site in April for the New York primaries for the president. And then between April and June, we had a much smoother planning process. Everyone kind of knew what to do this time around. And then we had the June New York congressional primaries at the end of June. And we found that kind of prep period, which was much easier to navigate. So these are some pictures from our April poll site. And so what we did was we got permission from the Board of Elections to have our AGF ambassadors and Pace Votes leaders table outside the room where folks were voting. The voting was taking place right in here in the Student Center. It's a building where students are going to class and stuff like that. And so we knew it's always a high trafficked area. And so we knew if we had additional stuff besides voting, actual voting happening, that we would be able to like engage even more of the student body in the day. And so this is where a lot of our student creativity came in to come up with activities for us to like make the day fun and exciting for students who vote in other states, even other parts of the city, or students who are ineligible to vote. And so we have some pictures of some of the things. This is a zine. If you're not familiar with zines, they're like little like self-published magazine type things, pamphlet-y things. And so our student staff designed a zine. It's about voter rights, kind of like knowing your rights as a voter, some connections between like social justice issues PACE students care about and voting. Information for accessibility at the polls, like knowing your rights if you're a disabled voter, and then also knowing your rights if you're trans or non-binary voter, but designing it in a fun way, colorful, like very like grassroots kind of design publication. We were handing those out all semester, and so we had some of these at the table. This is like a big mural we've made, which is going to be hung up in our office. It says PACE votes, and then students who came by could paint in it, like a giant coloring book, paint by numbers type idea. And we had a lot of people coming by, like seeing that first and then asking what was going on. And then we were able to talk to them about the election, the presidential election, what a primary was, and how they could vote in the future, or if they hadn't voted yet, where they could vote when their state's primary was, or when they could vote that day. We had some folks ask questions about, like, I'm a commuter, where do I vote this evening, kind of thing. Recognizing that we have a fair amount of commuters, we also did like a map activity where you could like put a little pin where in the city you had voted, to kind of show that voting was taking place both at PACE and also around the city. And then we also answered a lot of logistical questions from some first-time voters, and stuff like that. So it was a great way to engage people. We had food, we had music, so we tried to make it fun environment. Sorry. And so for kind of outcomes, we are really proud of how it went. There were hiccups in like the logistics sometimes, mostly in the days prior to the April election. But besides that, like, we are definitely hoping to kind of just replicate what we have done in the spring for this November. In terms of the like practicalities, in April, we had about 100 voters come, about half PACE students and half folks who live in apartments near campus. We did not realize we could ask the Board of Elections for this specific data until June. And then in June, we asked them at the end of the night how many folks had checked in, and it was 96. And so these are for primaries. The June one was for congressional primary, not even the president. And so we're kind of pleased with how this is. And the Board of Elections said it was pretty similar to rates at other poll sites across the city, and so kind of consistent with turnout in the city generally. Students definitely engage with the activities a lot. The mural was painted really quickly. And then we had a lot of student voters come in April and June, not a lot because most of them are home for the summer. And so we kind of like collected like what feedback we were getting from students. A lot of students said that they were voting like right before, right after class. And so it shows us that it was more accessible for them to like embed this into their regular schedule. And then some students also shared, hey, this was a lot easier. I used to get lost finding my poll site. They used to not know like what building nearby to go to vote. And so having it here helped people find it more easily because it's a room students are used to, going to events in all the time. We also got feedback from poll workers that they really like this site. I spoke with a lot of poll workers who have been working the polls in New York for decades, and they said that they really enjoyed doing it at PACE because they have access to campus resources during their breaks. It's a really long day for them. We got there at 5 a.m. We left at 10 p.m. They could use the bathroom. They could use PACE Wi-Fi. They could get food from on campus and stuff like that. There were spots to sit on their breaks that weren't the poll site. They also said like, there can be moments when they're really busy, but there can also be moments like at 5 a.m. when it's really quiet. And so walking around campus, looking at posters, hearing students like chatting made it more exciting for them. And then we also spoke to a lot of community members, so who live right near campus, who shared like that this was their first time on campus, that they'd always been curious what it looked like in here. And they enjoyed getting to see a little bit of it when they came to vote. We had some folks who have lived in the neighborhood for a really long time. We had some like parents bringing in young children to vote, and we heard them kind of talking about like, oh, this is a college, and explaining what a college was. So we are also really excited that this was like a great way to engage with our community. Our office also is the office that thinks about like volunteerism in the city and stuff. And so it's like very much aligned with like our larger goals too, of like breaking down the barriers between campus and like our communities. So we are hoping for much higher turnout in November, but for like similarly successful experience. And so with that, some things we're thinking about for November is we've reserved the space back in the spring. And so making sure we have access to the space. We've already met with like all the facilities and security folks, and they're all on board this time, prepared, know how many staff they need, that kind of thing. We have requested from the Board of Elections that they don't drop off the stuff to my office like 2 weeks in advance this time. And so logistically, we're feeling more prepared. Since we know this is happening already, now we can talk about the poll site from like our first engagement with students when they get here on campus around Labor Day. We'll talk about the poll site in all of our course presentations. We normally do about like 20 or 30 a semester. So we'll be able to tell a lot of students about this. We're planning to get food for the poll workers. We had limited funding for this last time, but we're going to have donuts and pizza and stuff like that. So again, like thinking how we're preparing to welcome a lot of people to campus too. And then we're also going to be working on doing some more like arts-based creative programming to engage people who aren't voting, to make the day more fun, to lure people over who might go vote after they see a fun activity or something. And then also to just like have a space for connection and fun during what's obviously going to be a very stressful period for people who are stressed about the election. So yeah, and it's just, this is still just like one element of our larger work. We still are supporting students with absentee voting. We're getting students who to vote who are studying abroad, like all of our students, but this is kind of the residential plan for our residential students who choose to vote here. With that, I think I'll pause for questions or like things folks would like to ask or contribute or anything. No questions. Can I ask folks questions? Does anyone here like have an on-campus poll site already? Or is anyone here like considering trying to get one? You have one at the University of Alabama. Cool. Was the process, I'm also just nosy, was the process, if you know, Daniel, like similar or different? Did it sound easier or harder? I think Daniel's probably typing. One thing I would say is it was much easier than I anticipated. It was also different than I anticipated. I think when we started it, our ambassadors were prepared to have to do more advocacy and activism themselves. Like they were prepared to have to get the student government involved or to have an event or a rally or something on campus. They're prepared to get like student names and petitions, all because we had heard at other New York State schools too, like when Board of Elections aren't willing to have an on-campus poll site. For us, it was a lot of like the less glamorous elements of organizing, sending a lot of emails, talking to a lot of people who we don't always talk to, like I don't normally work with our security guards much kind of thing. I'm not normally walking around with like rulers in our student center. And so it was a lot more of like those nitty gritty things that we like hadn't anticipated. Several years of student lobbying. Yeah, that's what I'd kind of heard from other schools. It went kind of quicker than I feared that it would. We were hoping to have like one tryout before a presidential election. And so we're glad that we were able to do it this spring to prepare for November. Does anyone else have any other questions or anything they want to add? And do you want to add anything about like our tablings, like how you guys were telling people about the on-campus pulse site, or what you're thinking about like doing it for this year, like some of the other things we have planned for this fall?
For like when we had like the first poll site, I think people were very surprised because a lot of people were asking questions like what was happening, and we were like, people were out there like voting, and they're like, oh, you guys have a poll site. So I feel like with that first step, students were like surprised, but like also amazed by the fact that they had a poll site within the campus, and they were actually very engaging, even though some of them had like to go to class or whatever, but a lot of them participated and asked us questions or like had feedback about it. And so I think that was like a very positive outcome about it. In terms of our next few poll site, um, I just hope that we just get more in other areas in campus, especially like in the Westchester one as well. I'm hoping as well. Yeah.
Yeah, our Westchester campus has had one, and fingers crossed they should be having one again in November too. Their process was a little bit different. We were in, like just based on our one campus here, but their Board of Elections reached out because they were looking for a new spot in the area. However, like 10 years ago, they had tried to get one and met a lot of resistance from the Board of Elections. And so it's also, I think, about like how demographics and space and like other institutions like change over time too. Like previously, they were very much not willing to have it at Pace and the Westchester campus, and now they are. So I think Anne's really right in talking about like that folks were surprised, and that's still something I've been encountering. Anne and I have been tabling like at orientation sessions this summer, and parents are surprised when I'm like, oh yeah, and then they vote in that room right behind us. And I think it's kind of cool to think about like this journey as like eventually getting to the point where like students aren't surprised, like it feels really normal for them, and it's just like what happens in November here, and like still retaining some of that excitement of the surprise, but also knowing and expecting that it's a thing. Okay, so asynchronous election day. Asynchronous election day organizing was a bit more like student and like consistent student involvement than the poll site was. What we did was our ambassadors worked with student government to first like gather testimony from students who had had a hard time finding time to vote on election day. This was also when our poll sites weren't on campus. And so the factor of like having to find time to travel off campus was part of it too. And so they gathered testimony that kind of confirmed for them that classes were causing a barrier to student voting. And then they reached out to faculty council. So it kind of varies at institutions, but oftentimes the faculty, like governing body, like votes on the calendar and is the ones to approve the calendar. And we knew that faculty council did the calendar at Pace. And so I reached out to faculty, like allies and colleagues, to ask who's in charge of that calendar process. So we asked for meetings with them and student government at the same time in preparation for the meeting, like wrote a more formal letter than we ever had to do for the poll site process, passing a resolution through Student Government Association that they kind of were demanding that faculty council have election day off, and we were trying for election day off. And then we had a few meetings with faculty council, walking them through the letter, the reasons for the demands. Student government more so focused on like testimony from students who had had trouble voting. And then our office talked about like best practices and cited other schools that had had successful election days off campus. And we focused on like neighboring schools, schools that are similar size, and like Pace is private, so kind of like similar demographics. And then it became like a little bit of a negotiation. Faculty council asked, like, what would the impact of asynchronous be? And so we kind of came to that as a compromise. So like students could still have an assignment they have to do that day or something, but there should be nothing time bound. And then faculty council like embedded that into their plans for the forthcoming calendar and voted, and they did vote to approve it. We were working on this in like 2020, but faculty council approves calendars like multiple years out. And so the first asynchronous election day wasn't until this past fall, 2023. And so I think the fact that we were working on this during the 2020 period, early 2021, meant that elections were still on people's minds and they were willing to like act in a way. So I think like some of it was also like the strategic timing of it. In terms of like administrative support beyond faculty, we didn't really have to tackle any of that, because here it's like very much the faculty who decide about the poll site. And then it happened. We found that unfortunately it wasn't as impactful as we wanted it to be. But also something we hadn't really thought about was faculty vote on the calendar every single year. And so we need to be following up with them every single year to make sure that they continue to do this. And it seems like they're not going to at Pace. They're kind of moving off of having any asynchronous classes as like we fully kind of move back to pretty much all in person. And so I don't know if other schools, like if asynchronous could still be an option, or maybe you should really go for the like full no classes, no nothing approach. But keeping in mind that like this would probably be a few years out that they're working on right now. And also like you're going to need someone to check in every time. And I think a challenge with student organizing is always that like students then graduate. And so I answered this question because Anne wasn't here when we did this work, right? Like those students have now graduated, and it was just kind of only could have been me who carried forth this knowledge and checked in with the faculty council, and I still do, and I follow their meeting notes whenever they talk about the calendar, but it's difficult for like one person to be the keeper of like, what is faculty doing about the calendar? I think if we found that it was impactful, that if we found that students were finding this really helpful for voting, we would have kept bothering faculty council about it. But when it came and the students that we really wanted to help voting were all in class, we realized it wasn't like the best strategy to put our time into. But that's not to say you shouldn't do it, because all schools are really different. And I know a lot of schools have had like a lot of great success once this has been implemented too. Cool. And you should let me know if it works out. Any other questions or like stuff folks want to add? Okay. Our last little quote activity is perhaps made obsolete now. Oh, we already did this by AGF's great playlist from today, but we were going to invite you to contribute to our election day playlist. So something we're definitely planning on doing is being there all day on election day. I will be there starting at 5 a.m. I will need some music to get me through the day. The poll workers will definitely need some music, and it'll make it a fun environment as everyone's stressed, wondering who the president's going to be. So I'm going to ask you to drop in the chat because my Spotify skills are not up to par, and I worked very hard on making a playlist that I thought was collaborative, and it's not. So instead, I want everyone to drop in the chat the song you want us to play on election day, and then we'll play it. We'll think of you all. You can also open up the Great AGF one and just write down a song in there that you were into for today, and we will add you to our excitement in November.